What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the reveal of number 30 in my power rankings, a deep dive into the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, coming just one episode after another Florida team in the Dolphins that I had somewhat surprisingly low for a lot of people. Tampa Bay, yet again, for seemingly like the 10th year in a row, has a decent amount of hype surrounding this team yet again as we head into 2018. And I know what a lot of you Bucks fans are going to say. The only thing we couldn't do is rush the passer, and we added Vinny Curry and Jason Pierre-Paul and drafted Vita Vea. Look, the defense will be a little better because of that pass rush, don't get me wrong. But it's incredibly short-sighted to say that the pass rush was the only problem in Tampa Bay, and even Vinny Curry and Jason Pierre-Paul aren't going to take you from the 32nd pass rush to a elite pass rush that will hide this poor secondary. And that's just on the defensive side of the ball. When you look on the other side, the thing is, you still got Jameis Winston as your quarterback. Look, I grew up a Packer fan. Every single week that we got to play Jay Cutler and the Chicago Bears, I know I got excited for that third quarter interception, that back-breaking turnover that just totally deflates your entire team and everything that your teammates have been working for all week. And I know that NFL opponents look forward to that same mistake, that Jameis Winston, let's be honest, the only consistent thing about him in his career is that he will make a terrible decision that costs you the game 5 or 6 times a year. And when you're that guy's teammate, it gets redundant and exhausting. I am significantly lower on Jameis Winston. It is the reason, paired with the coach and culture, which plays a big role in my power rating scale here. Now, I said back in a what I would do mock draft before the draft that I would have drafted a quarterback if I was Tampa Bay, moved on from Jameis Winston. Stop telling yourself that he is the future. It's just not going anywhere. He hasn't developed an ounce since he came into the league. I'm sorry, Bucks fans, but sometimes you gotta face the music. And then your coach, to be honest, let's just say Dirk Cutter has a lot to prove this year. I was pretty surprised that they brought him back, frankly, after a very disappointing season yet again last year. I just don't see this team putting it all together. They start their season at New Orleans and then with the Steelers and the Eagles, so they're probably going to start 0-3. And, I just don't see this as a team that's going to, unify together in an impossible division and conference and all of a sudden improve this year. I get it. You made a lot of improvements to your roster, but if you're a Bucks fan saying, how could you possibly say we're going to, have a worse record this year? We only improved. Well, that's really short-sighted because there's 31 other teams in the league that also improved this offseason, none of which are taking the insanity approach and just saying, same coach, same quarterback, it'll be better this year. So that's kind of my outlook for this Bucks team. We'll go through the roster here, do positional grades. It's definitely not all bad for the Bucks. They do have a talented roster. A lot of this negative outlook comes from the fact that they really just don't have a chance in this division. But really, overall, offensively, I see this being about the same team as last year. And then defensively, yeah, they'll take a step up thanks to the new pass rush here. But, man, they still have arguably the worst secondary in the league, which is really important in the NFL today. So let's get into the roster here, starting at quarterback. We talked about Jameis Winston here. So I've got the Bucks with a 74 rating for quarterback, coming in tied for 24th. So it's not like I think he's the worst quarterback in the NFL. But frankly, I'm a little surprised that I'm seemingly the only person that shares this opinion of Jameis, and that he is literally Jay Cutler. Strong arm, mobile dude, will show you flashes of a really freaking good quarterback, but has virtually no attention to detail, no consistency. The one thing that I actually think Jameis is worse than Jay Cutler is he is wildly inaccurate on intermediate throws over the middle of the field, which is so dangerous because that's when a lot of interceptions happen. And then you pair that with the fact that he creates turnovers so consistently when you can pressure him. I'm not going to say panics, but just makes such dumb decisions. He's getting sacked and he tries to throw it and it turns into a fumble, or it just skyrockets up into the air and is an easy interception. This is the kind of stuff that just destroys your team and everything you've worked for, and that is my problem with Jameis Winston. I don't think it's ever going to get better. If he was in his first or second year, I'd say maybe, but we're entering his fourth season, and he's been doing this since college. I don't see why it's going to change now. And they really don't have any young players here at quarterback that I'm excited for them to, potentially try and develop and overtake Jameis Winston. That's why I said draft a Luke Falk in the second round, draft a Mason Rudolph, who can at least show Jameis that, hey, we're not sold on you as our franchise. You haven't done much for us as a team. You haven't been eating enough W's for us. So they really don't have anyone pushing Jameis Winston to really reach a next level, any kind of step up whatsoever. Austin Allen is an undrafted free agent they signed here. He'll compete with Ryan Griffin. I would like to see Allen make this team just to have someone young in this room. I don't think he's got crazy upside or anything, but he is a nice mobile game manager type of guy who I'm kind of intrigued by. And then you got Fitzpatrick there as well as the backup. So overall, this quarterback room needs improvement, and they have not done enough to address it, whether it's actually replacing Jameis Winston or just bringing in someone to actually push him. And then moving on to running back, where I have them rated 30th, and you might just think I'm still just ripping on the Bucks, but you can go back. I didn't even have Ronald Jones in my top 10 running backs. He screams Christine Michael to me. If you guys remember the pre-draft hype that surrounded the freak athlete Christine Michael, I thought Ronald Jones' tape was identical to what we see from Christine Michael. Really bursty guy, twitchy athlete, but virtually no true vision. He'll kick it outside when there's not a hole. I don't necessarily see that as vision or patience. It's just using your athleticism above inferior athletes at the college level. He's got nice power for his size, but he's not that big. So I definitely think he's much more Christine Michael than Jamal Charles, which I see all the time. He's not much of a receiver out of the backfield either. So while Jones is probably the starter here, I am not very high on him at all. I thought Darius Geis would have been a fantastic pick for this Bucks team, who needs a physicality element in the run game. By the way, that's another reason I'm really low on this team, is they don't run the ball well at all. And when they did run the ball last year efficiently, it was mostly Doug Martin showing some good flashes, and he's gone. So you got Jaquiz Rodgers there, perennial backup, who could be flushed into a starting role here. They bring back Charles Sims as the receiving back. And I actually like Peyton Barber, but he doesn't have the physical upside to be a good starting running back, but I like his game. So they got a bunch of dudes here, but I don't see a single starting caliber feature back on this roster, even though they're going to try that out with Ronald Jones. I think it's going to be a disaster. So as far as fantasy is concerned, I really am not touching any of these guys, as I think this team's really going to struggle to run the ball. And then this receiving core, definitely the bright spot of the offense. They come in tied for fourth in the league, 87 overall for their receivers. I just wish that the scheme here under Coach Cutter would be a little more efficient for these guys. Deshaun Jackson, they really haven't found a good way to use him. Mike Evans is here, who I think is great, but perhaps a touch overrated. He doesn't create a ton of separation other than with his size, and then the drops, I think he'll be able to figure it out, but he still needs to just stop dropping open passes. I'd really like to see Mike Evans elevate, because he hasn't taken a big step up in a couple of years, in my opinion. Still a really good receiver. Got Adam Humphries as a good slot guy, but I think he's going to lose that slot job to Chris Godwin here, who really looked good. And I loved Chris Godwin coming out of the draft. I was pretty bummed that he ended up here in Tampa just because of the opportunity. But, I think there's a real chance that Chris Godwin just might be the best consistent receiver here in terms of being able to always get open, use the speed and quickness to create separation, and have consistent hands. I really do think that much of Chris Godwin. It's not necessarily a slight of Mike Evans. I just think Godwin has some serious upside to be like an Allen Robinson type of guy. So he's definitely a bright spot that I'm looking forward to watching this year, is if he can become the starting slot receiver here, which is a starting position for this team, get him on the field 80-90% of the time. Be really exciting to watch Godwin. Then they got Bobo Wilson, Freddie Martino, Justin Watson. They draft in the 5th round, kind of a bigger, almost freak athlete type of small school guy, kind of going for the Adam Thielen dart throw there with Justin Watson. So a really good receiving core. Just wish they would figure out how to use them a little better. It's just kind of a unoriginal scheme here in Tampa Bay, and they really have a lot of upside with Jackson's ability to stretch the field, what Godwin offers underneath, and then just Mike Evans overall. And then you factor in these tight ends, where they have 2 really good tight ends here. You got Cameron Brate, who's a good blocker, really good red zone threat. And then they haven't been able to figure out how to get OJ Howard involved in this offense, but just so many great playmakers here for this offense. But it's been all promise and potential to this point. They have not shown any sort of consistent ability to get these guys all clicking, figure out what each player's role is, and have Jameis Winston execute that scheme. That's a lot to ask of this team based on what you've seen from Winston and Dirk Cutter to put this all together. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit why I'm not as high on this offense as the hype seems to have it every single year for this Tampa Bay team. And then another problem with this offense, and this kind of comes back to their inability to run the ball and why I'm less excited about a guy like Ronald Jones, is this offensive line's pretty uninspired as well. You got Donovan Smith at left tackle, who has really struggled since coming into the league. A lot of Bucks fans will tell you he's not as bad as like his PFF grade. I'm not convinced. Then you've got the veteran Evan Dietrich Smith at left guard. Okay, you draft Alex Kappa to potentially take his job. So you don't really know what you're getting from that left guard position. You've got the one-year breakout center, Ryan Jensen, that you give a bunch of money from Baltimore. I think he's an average starting center, so that is an upgrade. You move Ollie Marpet to right guard and DeMar Dotson at right tackle. So from center to right tackle, you got a good group there. I like that J.R. Sweezy will be going to the bench because I think he was the biggest liability. So it's not a bad offensive line. I have them tied for 21st, but that left side of the line does concern me. I think they're similar to Miami's offensive line that we talked about, how yeah, they're not really going to hinder you from doing what you want to do, but they're also not going to really allow you to do anything special. They just kind of are there, create a little bit of push in the run game. They'll have a few hiccups in terms of pass protection, but overall, just an okay line, but not an imposing one. So, overall, it's just the inconsistency for me with this offense, really centered around my concerns with Jameis Winston and this scheme and coaching from Dirk Cutter. The talent is obviously here, and it's the number one reason you guys are going to tell me I'm crazy. But for me to sit here and say for the 4th year in a row that, oh, this is the year that Tampa Bay puts it all together, I'm not going to go there. It's just not with the same quarterback, not with the same coach. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, and that's exactly the case here. So let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. We mentioned them bringing in this new pass rush. Really good improvement there. Definitely something they needed. This team did really struggle to get after the quarterback last year, and bringing in Jason Pierre-Paul and Vinny Curry, who neither of them are number 1 edge rushers, but they are both really good number 2s. So this should bring them from what was the worst team getting after the quarterback to, I think, average. I have them at 16th in terms of pass rush. That definitely is helped by Gerald McCoy, who is one of the best pass rushing interior guys. So we break the front 7 up in my power rankings by run defense, pass rush, and linebacking group. So we're obviously going to start here with the pass rush. Noah Spence here, William Golson, who were your 2 starters last year, as now rotational guys. So just a massive upgrade to this pass rush. It will hide some of the weaknesses, not some of the weakness of this defense, which is the secondary. So getting after the quarterback will allow some of these defensive backs to up their play. Now, I don't think this is going to be such a dominant edge rush that it sustains a good, consistent defense, but it's definitely going to help. So then in terms of run defense, they weren't terrible against the run last year, but drafting Vita Vea is definitely going to help in terms of run defense. Now, notice I did not mention Vea's name in terms of helping the pass rush because I don't see him as a pass rushing defensive lineman. He is really a nose tackle type, but where I think he helps the most is going to be eating blocks and opening up run defense lanes for these great linebackers, Quan Alexander and Levante David, who are a little undersized. So now they're going to see less blocking and be able to really get after the run lanes. So that was a good pick. Personally, Derwin James would have really been a smarter pick in my opinion, because you signed Bo Allen here and Mitch Unrein, who are two really good interior linemen. And now you draft Vita Vea and are just pushing them back on the depth chart and wasting that investment. And I think it is going to help, but I think they could have really helped this team more by adding an elite member in the secondary, which they really lack with the high pick that they had. So the run defense will be improved this year. That said, looking at my power ratings, run defense doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of things in terms of winning games in the modern NFL. It's more about protecting the pass, and we'll talk about the secondary in a second. I mentioned these linebackers, really, really good group. They come in tied for third, 85 overall. Now, it's not the deepest group, but with Levante David and Quan Alexander out there, you have probably behind Jacksonville the fastest group of linebackers out there. Levante David is just incredible in coverage, so instinctive. Quan Alexander, good in coverage, probably a little bit better in run defense than Levante David. But overall, really big fan of these linebackers. I like how they play the run, but they also will cover. And like I said, their weakness really was thumping between the tackles, and beefing up this interior line is definitely going to help them neuter that weakness. You got Kendall Beckwith there playing as kind of an awkward outside linebacker. He's a big dude. He's not that quick, but they use him kind of as like an edge rusher a lot of the times. He actually graded out all right in coverage, so he's going to be an intriguing guy to see if he can kind of elevate his game in that role as that rotational, quote-unquote, base outside linebacker. You don't really start three linebackers anymore, so that third linebacker is going to play like 15% of your snaps, so it's not critical for him to be great, but he definitely has some upside. He was a player I thought was really intriguing coming out of the draft. And then the depth here, it's kind of whatever. They do draft Jack Sitchie out of Wisconsin. I think he'll kind of be that rotational outside linebacker like I mentioned. So they got to keep David and Alexander healthy for sure. That's a big part of this defense. And those guys haven't had the perfect health over the last few years, so that'll be big. So let's move on to the secondary here, and this is really an eyesore when you consider how good this front seven has looking on paper. So you still got Brent Grimes there. He's 36, 37 years old, dealt with injuries last year. Can you expect him to be a true number one corner again this year? He's proved us wrong before, but he's definitely trending downwards. And then Vernon Hargreaves, right now listed as the nickelback. I don't know how he doesn't play outside, just given this depth chart. I thought he showed flashes last year, really started to come on in the second half of the season, so he needs, and this team needs him desperately to continue trending upwards. A first-round pick from a few years ago. Now, the third year has been really big for first-round corners. If you go back and look at the last 5 years or so, that third season has been very telling, where you've seen a lot of guys take big jumps. Xavier Rhodes comes to mind. Darius Slay took a big jump in his third season. So can Hargreaves reach that? I don't know. He hasn't shown it on film, but I guess you never know. That would be big for this defense to get a number one corner, because I don't believe Brent Grimes is going to be running with Julio Jones consistently at 37 years old, or Michael Thomas in this division. And then you got Ryan Smith here, who is kind of a freak athlete and an intriguing player, but someone that, frankly, this team might be phasing out as they take 2 corners in the second round. Now, I am a big MJ Stewart fan, and I kind of projected him as a nickelback, really instinctive run defender. Coverage is up in the air, but he is a good athlete. I think he's going to cover pretty well. I think he's best suited here as the starting nickelback, and I think he wins that job, not Vernon Hargreaves, because Hargreaves is not much of a run defender. MJ Stewart will be great playing closer to the box, and he has the quickness to cover some of those slot receivers as well. But they took Carlton Davis, was the other second-round corner. Not a fan of him. Incredibly stiff dude. You know, they're basically hoping that he can be that Richard Sherman prototype, the big, long press corner. I think he's going to get pushed down on this depth chart and end up being the 5th corner here, as Ryan Smith and Hargreaves and Grimes, frankly, compete for the 2 starting outside guys. But I am going to pencil in MJ Stewart as a stud nickel corner in this league. I think he could have similar numbers to like Desmond King last year for the Chargers. Maybe not quite as good, but a similar type of profile there. So maybe the pass rush can help these corners figure it out. We'll see. I clearly have my question marks. And then at safety, kind of a mishmash of guys here. So you got Chris Connie is still here. He's been starting in this league for a long time, and you know, he must have something that coaches really like about him. He must be a really smart, good leader in the locker room, because on film he's incredibly all over the place. But he does offer some sort of consistency to this secondary where they lack it. And then you've got Justin Evans here, who I think has a lot of upside, needs to improve in coverage, but kind of reminds me of a young Adrian Amos. He'll come up and hit you hard, shows some flashes in coverage, but definitely just needs to develop. I hope that he starts here. You got Keith Tandy still on this team, who had a really good season 2 years ago and then just disappeared, and Josh Robinson. So a lot of veteran depth there competing for a starting spot. And then they draft Jordan Whitehead, who I thought was a great playmaker in college. Both him and MJ Stewart, actually pretty similar players as nickelbacks. So I don't know if Whitehead's going to start here. I think a lot of Bucs fans would like to just see Justin Evans and Jordan Whitehead be the starters here and just develop the youth. I don't know if that's the route they're going to go, but, you know, I kind of played off the idea that, yeah, it was actually really smart to take 2 really instinctive defensive backs who forced a lot of turnovers in college, because you need someone to get that ball back after Jameis Winston gives it to the other team. So, you know, Whitehead definitely offers that to this defense, some instincts. And then they were able to pick up Godwin Igwebuike as well as an undrafted free agent. I'd like to see him make this team as just a freak athlete safety out of Northwestern. So my outlook for this defense is much more optimistic. You know, unfortunately, my pessimism about it is the fact that you got to play the Falcons, Panthers, and Saints a total of 6 times. And you got to be really freaking consistent and solid and have an identity to compete with those teams. And there's just way too many questions on this entire team. The defense, I think, makes more sense, but the secondary has a ton of questions. So, you know, the offense comes in ranked 25th overall, and then the defense actually 28th, which is lower than I expected, but it is that secondary that drags them down, and the coach and culture thing as well that drags them down, as they come in 30th in the league for coach and culture. I'm just not a big believer in Dirk Cutter getting this team to unify and rally together. So let's take a look at the schedule here as we wrap up this deep dive. I mentioned that tough start at New Orleans, Philly, Pittsburgh. They're going to start 0-3. I have a very hard time seeing them winning any of those games. And given the circumstances here, you're going to have Cutter on the hot seat. People are going to be attacking Jameis Winston. The team is going to have a hard time rallying And then they have to go on the road to Chicago and then Atlanta. Chicago is going to be much improved. That's going to be a tough win, and I don't see them winning in Atlanta. So if this team starts 0-5, that could get seriously ugly. And it seems more probable than not that they do start 0-5. They're probably going to fire Cutter at that point, who's already on the hot seat. And then at that point, to say they can beat Cleveland and a win in Cincinnati, that's tough to predict. But, you know, looking at the schedule, I keep talking about the NFC and how brutal it is. And you can tell by this schedule, it's not going to shake out well for this Bucks team. I gave them a win, being generous with a question mark against Carolina. That put them at 4. The over-under for this team is 6.5. And right now, I would be hammering this bet. If your state has already legalized gambling, I'm waiting on Minnesota to get there. But man, I would hit that bookie. I would go under for the Bucks, 6.5 wins. Right now, I'm seeing it at plus 140. Man, that seems like an absolute lock when you look at this schedule. And everything I've talked about with this Bucks team. Is the upside there? You could argue it, yes, but I don't think so. Not with this quarterback coach combination. So that's it, guys. I'm really excited to see some comments on this. I know this is going to seem really low for Tampa Bay. We still got teams like Buffalo and the Jets ranked ahead of them. But I'm curious to know if I may have changed your opinion on this Bucks team. If you might be more on board with the fact that this team is going to be picking in the top 5 and potentially considering a quarterback in next year's draft with a new coach. So let me know in the comments below. Like the video if you enjoyed. Cheers, everyone. We'll see you next time.